Follow us today to a 2014 American magic realism comedy drama called The Cobbler. Before we start, be aware, there are spoilers. The scene opens in New York City, 1903. A rabbi walks into a cobbler shop to meet with a group from the Jewish community to discuss their problems. The cobbler is given the shoes of a man who is causing them trouble, and he takes them to a stitching machine for repair. His son watches the repair as the cobbler tells him the story of how they acquired the stitching machine. His grandfather did a good deed for a vagrant, and the next morning the vagrant was gone. But a stitching machine had appeared. Fast forward to present day, Max owns a shoe repair shop. Outside, he watches a girl called Taryn with her boyfriend Emiliano. The owner of the barbershop next door joins him and asks about his love life and also asks about his mother. A girl called Carmen walks into the shop. She is trying to drum up support from the local businesses as developers are trying to force out the local residents. He suggests that maybe he should sell, but she inspires him with a speech about how his shop is part of what makes the city special. She gives him a leaflet and asks him to get involved with protests supporting an old man called Mr. Solomon, who they are trying to evict from his home. After work, Max goes home and prepares dinner for his old mother, Sarah. The following day, a rude man named Leon comes to the shop. As Max cleans his shoes, he admires Leon's watches. He says he has many and leaves some shoes for Max to repair. He says he'll be back at 6 p.m. to collect them. During the repair, the stitching machine breaks, and so he goes to the basement, uncovers an old stitching machine, and uses it to complete the repair. At the end of the day, he's waiting for Leon to collect his shoes. He notices that they are a size 10.5, the same as him, so he tries them on. As he looks in the mirror, he sees Leon's face staring back in his reflection. As he removes the shoes, he is returned to normal. He tries the same thing with other shoes, but nothing happens. So he goes back to the basement and uses the old machine to stitch another pair of shoes. When he puts them on and looks in the mirror, his appearance has changed yet again. He tries again and again, taking on the appearance of many others, including a now dead man and a transvestite called Marcia. The following day, he returns some shoes to a news reporter called Danny Donald from the news, who leaves him with his card. Max tries out his new ability. He walks into Jimmy's shop and isn't recognized. He wears the shoes of an Asian man and hangs out in Chinatown. He eats in an expensive restaurant, changes shoes in the bathroom, and leaves without paying. He steals the shoes from a man with a nice car, and then retrieves his car from the valet. When he arrives home that night, Sarah asks about his day. He asks her if she could do anything she wanted, what would it be? She says it would be to have dinner with his father once again. His father, Abraham, left them some years ago. He goes to the closet and takes some of his father's shoes. The next day, Taryn comes into the shop with Emiliano's shoes for repair. He uses the stitching machine and impersonates her boyfriend. He goes to a bar to pick up girls, but when he leaves with one and tells her that he lives with his mother, she leaves him. Max sees Emiliano outside his apartment and slips off his shoes quickly. As Emiliano leaves, Max rings the doorbell and Taryn lets him in. She asks him to join her in the shower, but as he realizes that he would need to remove his shoes, he quickly leaves. At home, Sarah is watching a TV report hosted by Danny. It features Carmen and Mr. Solomon at the protest. The next day, Max runs into Carmen in the street. She asks him again to get involved. Later, disguised as a kid, he watches her in her office. He finishes stitching his dad's shoes, puts them on, and looks in the mirror. That night, Sarah is all dressed up, ready for dinner. Max walks into the room disguised as Abraham and spends the evening with Sarah. He puts her to bed, says goodbye to his father's reflection, then puts the shoes back in the wardrobe. The following morning, he discovers that his mother has passed away. At the funeral, Jimmy tells Max that he was a good son. Leon finally returns to the shop to collect his shoes. He is very insensitive concerning Max's mother's death. Max asks for the ticket which Leon has lost. Leon demands he find his shoes before tomorrow, or he'll be reunited with his mom. Max disguises himself and follows Leon down the street. On the way, Leon threatens some men in the shop before returning to his apartment. Max waits outside, and when Leon leaves, he disguises himself as Leon and knocks on the door. Leon's girlfriend, Macy, answers. She is angry with Leon as he had hit her, and she says she is leaving. Once she has gone, Max searches the apartment. He finds a bag containing guns and weapons and accidentally tasers himself. He regains consciousness sometime later, but as he attempts to leave the apartment, still disguised as Leon, he meets actual Leon at the door. Leon tries to strangle him, but Max uses the taser to knock him out. Max ties him up, and when Leon regains consciousness, Max, now disguised as the kid, demands to know where the watches are. When Leon won't tell, Max leaves the room and returns disguised as Marcia, the transvestite, wearing size 10.5 red stiletto heels. Leon is nervous and tells Marcia where the watches are hidden. Max finds them and puts them in his bag. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Leon says that it is his boys, and they're all going to pick up $50,000. Max leaves Leon tied up and goes with the boys disguised as Leon. On the way, the boys take him to a building where a guy called Rat Prick is being beaten up. They are about to shoot him, but Max makes him apologize and then tells him to let him go. The gang looks on in disbelief. Max continues with the boys, and they go to a house belonging to Mr. Greenwall. She gives him an envelope of money and tells him he'll get the rest when the job is done. He returns to Leon's apartment disguised as Marcia, but Leon has escaped and holds a gun to him. Leon hits Marcia with the gun and tries to choke him to death, but Marcia manages to kick off one of the shoes and Leon reels back, startled as Marcia becomes Max. They continue to struggle and Max uses a shoe that is still on his foot to stab Leon in the neck. Leon collapses to the floor, dead. Max runs out of the apartment and goes home. The following day, he wakes up and goes to the police to report the murder. He tries to explain what happened, but they don't seem to believe him, especially after they go to Leon's apartment and there's no sign of the body, or blood, shoes, money, or the weapons. Despite Max's protest, the police leave. When Max returns to his shop, the bag containing the shoes, money, and the weapons is waiting for him. Jimmy comes out to see him and asks what's going on. Max tells him that he's going to give the money back. Jimmy warns him that he saw this kind of erratic behavior from his father shortly before his disappearance. He says that he'd gotten into trouble with bad people who said that they would hurt him and his mother. Max is angry that Jimmy knew this all this time and never said anything. But Jimmy says that his father had made him promise not to. Disguised as Marcia, Max returns the money to Mrs. Greenwall and says that Leon can't do the job. She gets one of her assistants, Brian, to knock Marcia out. He awakens in the back of a car and overhears Brian talking to another assistant, Jeffrey, about torching the place on Grand Street tomorrow night. They notice a smell in the car. Max has changed into the shoes of the dead man. Brian and Jeffrey are startled by the sight of a zombie in the back, and they crash the car. Max escapes. The next day, Max is in his shop when he notices the leaflet that Carmen had left him about Mr. Solomon, the old man that is being forcibly evicted on Grand Street. He goes to see Carmen and tells her of Mrs. Greenwald's plan to burn the apartment. It appears that Mrs. Greenwald owns all of the surrounding properties, except for Mr. Solomon's. Max and Carmen visit Mr. Solomon to warn him, but he says he still won't sell, even though they plan to burn his apartment down with him inside. Max borrows his shoes and leaves to make a deal with Mrs. Greenwald, $100,000, and a bus ticket to Chicago to live with his daughter. Mrs. Greenwald agrees and says that she will send someone to escort him to Chicago. Brian and Jeffrey arrive at Mr. Solomon's apartment, and he makes them remove their shoes. Max steals them from outside and uses the stitching machine on him. Disguised again as Leon, Max enters the apartment building. Jeffrey spots him and follows, but when he walks into Mr. Solomon's apartment, he finds Max, disguised as Brian, sat in a chair. He is confused as Brian is supposed to be escorting Mr. Solomon to Chicago. Max distracts Jeffrey and tasers him. Now disguised as Jeffrey, Max calls Mrs. Greenwald and arranges to meet her. Mrs. Greenwald arrives at the apartment building and confirms with Brian that he is still with Mr. Solomon. After the call, Brian is arrested at the bus station and Mr. Solomon continues on alone. Mrs. Greenwald encounters Carmen leaving the building, and confused, she goes up to the apartment. Max, disguised as Mr. Solomon, is waiting for her. He tells her that Brian was lying as he paid him off. She threatens that if he doesn't leave now, she will burn the place down and have his daughter killed. Suddenly, from the room behind, Danny Donald walks in with a camera crew. He filmed the whole exchange. The next morning, Taryn comes to collect Emiliano's shoes. Carmen also arrives and asks Max how he did it, but he doesn't say. She asks him for dinner next Friday. He agrees and she gives him her number. Now, disguised as Leon one last time, Max visits Macy and gives her Leon's watches to sell. When he leaves, he is stopped by Rat Prick, who forces him into a car at gunpoint and says it is time for payback. They tell him that he looks and smells like crap. Suddenly, the car is hit. Sometime later, Max regains consciousness at Jimmy's shop. Jimmy says he found him and pulled him out of the car. He says that he knows everything and that it was him that got rid of Leon's body from his apartment. He sits down, slips off his shoes, and becomes Abraham. They hug, but then Max is angry that his father never told him sooner. Abraham says that it was too dangerous before. They go to the basement and he reveals a huge room filled with shoes belonging to many different people. Abraham tells him that they use them to help other people and that this is his birthright. He then says that he can't leave through the front, looking like he does, so they have to leave through the back, where a chauffeur-driven limo is waiting for them. Abraham proceeds to tell Max about the vagrant and how their family acquired the stitching machine as they drive off into the city. Like and subscribe to watch more videos like this, and don't forget to turn on your notifications. That really helps my channel. Thanks for watching.